Today you're going to discover that there's a truth about the souls of the elderly that our society deliberately hides, a reality so powerful that few dare to speak it out loud. Thousands of people around the world carry a distorted perception about aging, believing that the soul deteriorates along with the body, when in reality the exact opposite happens. Today you'll discover the 10 spiritual signs that reveal how the souls of the elderly become more powerful, more connected, and closer to universal truth than at any other moment of existence. And what I'm going to reveal about the last sign will completely transform the way you see every older person around you. Helena Blavatsky, one of the greatest authorities in esoteric wisdom in history, dedicated years of her life studying the mysteries of human consciousness. She discovered that physical aging is just an illusion that masks the most extraordinary reality. The soul not only remains young, but expands, purifies, and approaches its divine essence as the years pass. While the world focuses on the limitations of the aging body, the true transformation happens in dimensions that our physical eyes cannot perceive. For decades, our culture has built a cruel narrative about aging. We treat the elderly as if they were shadows of who they once were, completely ignoring that, within those bodies that carry the marks of time, lives a soul in its moment of greatest wisdom and spiritual connection. It's as if society had made a silent pact to ignore one of the greatest truths of human existence. But you're here because your soul recognizes that there's something more. You feel that there's wisdom in the eyes of those who have lived longer, a depth in their words that goes beyond common experience. And you're right. What Helena Blavatsky revealed in her esoteric teachings is that the elderly carry within them spiritual keys that can open portals of understanding for anyone willing to recognize their true nature. In this moment, as you absorb these words, know that you're about to embark on a journey of revelation that will forever change the way you relate to aging, to the elderly around you, and especially to your own soul that also walks toward this expansion of consciousness. Because aging is not an end, it's an initiation. It's not a diminishment, it's an elevation. It's not a loss, it's an encounter with the purest truth that your soul can experience. The 10 signs I will reveal are not abstract theories. They are observable spiritual realities, distinctive marks that Helena Blavatsky identified as characteristics of souls that have reached spiritual maturity through lived time. And when you learn to recognize these signs, you will not only honor the elderly in a completely different way, but you will also understand the glorious destiny that awaits your own soul. The first sign that an elderly soul has reached a superior level of consciousness is when it stops completely identifying with the limitations of the physical body. Helena Blavatsky observed that there's a moment in life when the soul simply awakens to its true eternal nature and understands that it is not the body it inhabits. Have you ever noticed how many elderly people talk about themselves as if they were still young inside? It's not nostalgia or denial of reality. It's the soul recognizing its own timelessness. When an older person says, "I don't feel old," they're expressing a profound spiritual truth. The soul genuinely doesn't age, only the physical vehicle transforms. This awakening brings a unique sense of freedom. The elderly soul begins to detach from concerns that once seemed urgent. Questions about appearance, social status, accumulation of material goods lose their importance because consciousness has expanded and now sees these things for what they really are: temporary illusions that distract from eternal truth. Helena Blavatsky taught that this is the first step of the soul toward what she called initiatic wisdom. It's when the elderly person begins to access memories and perceptions that go far beyond this current life. Dreams become more vivid, intuitions more precise, and a sensation of "I've lived this before" becomes increasingly common. Many families interpret these changes as mental confusion or disconnection from reality. But in truth, it's exactly the opposite. It's the soul connecting with a broader, truer, more eternal reality. It's as if the layers of illusion that covered consciousness for decades finally began to dissolve. This first sign also manifests through an inexplicable inner peace. Even facing illnesses, losses, or physical limitations, the elderly soul carries a serenity that seems to come from a deep and inexhaustible source. It simply knows, at some level beyond the mind, that all is well, that there's a greater purpose, that nothing was in vain. The soul in this phase also develops a natural compassion for the struggles of the younger ones. It observes the hurry, the anxiety, the desperate search for meaning that characterizes the younger generations, and feels a maternal tenderness, knowing that one day they too will discover that all these struggles are part of a greater process of spiritual maturation. When you recognize this first sign in an elderly person close to you, know that you're before a soul that has begun its journey of return to the divine source. And if you want to be part of this transformative discovery, comment here which city you're watching from, so we can know how far this ancestral wisdom is reaching and touching hearts prepared to receive these truths. But prepare yourself, because the second sign will reveal something even more extraordinary about how elderly souls develop spiritual powers that most people don't even imagine exist. The second sign that Helena Blavatsky identified in elderly souls is the spontaneous development of extrasensory capabilities that remain dormant during youth. It's as if the aging of the physical body releases spiritual powers that were stored waiting for the right moment to manifest. Have you ever noticed how many elderly people seem to know things that no one told them? They sense when something isn't right with a distant family member, perceive changes in the environment before they even happen, or simply know information they shouldn't have access to. This isn't superstition or imagination, it's the soul exercising spiritual muscles that have finally found space to develop. Helena Blavatsky explained that during youth and adulthood, our consciousness is so focused on the demands of the physical world that subtle perceptions are constantly suffocated. But when the elderly soul frees itself from the need to compete, conquer, and accumulate, it naturally opens to dimensions of perception that were always there, just waiting for their turn to be discovered. This second sign frequently manifests through prophetic dreams. How many elderly people do you know who have dreamed of events before they happened? They dream of people they haven't seen in years and discover that these people were thinking of them at the same moment. They dream of family situations before they unfold in physical reality. Energy sensitivity also intensifies dramatically. An elderly soul can enter an environment and immediately perceive if there's harmony or conflict among the people present, even if nothing is said. It feels the emotional quality of spaces, identifies when someone is lying not by what is said, but by the energy that person emanates. Helena Blavatsky observed that many elderly people begin to receive visits from people who have already departed. Family members, friends, or even spiritual guides become constant presences in their lives. Modern society tends to pathologize these experiences, but in esoteric wisdom, they represent the soul preparing for its own transition, creating bridges between the physical and spiritual worlds. Another fascinating aspect of this sign is the ability to read people instantly. An elderly soul can look at someone for the first time and immediately understand deep aspects of their personality, their internal struggles, their undeveloped potentials. It's not judgment, it's pure perception, unfiltered by ego projections. Intuition becomes so sharp that many elderly people simply know things about the future, not through divination or elaborate esoteric practices, but through a natural connection with the energetic patterns that govern reality. They perceive the subtle currents that precede physical events. This awakening of extrasensory perception doesn't happen by chance. It's the soul preparing to expand beyond the limitations of physical perception, developing the senses that will be necessary when it eventually frees itself completely from the material body. But the third sign will reveal something even deeper: how elderly souls become living bridges between the past and future of humanity. The third sign identified by Helena Blavatsky is the transformation of the elderly soul into a living guardian of ancestral wisdom. In this phase, the person not only carries their own experiences, but becomes a channel through which ancient and forgotten knowledge can flow to new generations. You've certainly heard an elderly person tell a simple story that somehow carried an inexplicable depth. It wasn't just words or narrated events. It was as if through that narrative, universal truths were transmitted in an almost magical way. Helena Blavatsky taught that this happens because the elderly soul develops the ability to access what she called the Akashic records of human experience. This phenomenon manifests in surprising ways. A grandfather tells a story from his childhood, and inexplicably, That narrative contains exactly the lesson his grandson needs to hear at that specific moment. A grandmother shares a family recipe, and along with the ingredients transmits knowledge about healing, love and connection that goes far beyond cooking. The elderly soul in this phase also develops a natural capacity for synthesis. It can take complex experiences and extract from them simple essences that can be easily understood and applied by people at different stages of life. It's as if decades of living had distilled in its consciousness a type of concentrated wisdom, pure and directly applicable. Helena Blavatsky observed that many elderly people spontaneously begin to document their lives, not out of vanity or nostalgia, but from an internal impulse to preserve something important for the future. This impulse comes from the soul that recognizes its role as a link between generations, as a guardian of knowledge that cannot be lost. This phase also brings a profound understanding of life cycles. The elderly soul sees patterns that repeat through generations, identifies lessons that need to be learned collectively, perceives how apparently isolated events are part of larger movements in the evolution of human consciousness. Many elderly people report that they begin to remember things they never formally learned. Knowledge about medicinal plants, healing practices, wisdom about relationships and family life emerge naturally in their consciousness. Helena Blavatsky explained that this happens because the mature soul can access the accumulated wisdom of the entire ancestral lineage. The capacity for counseling also transforms. It's no longer based only on personal experience, but on wisdom that seems to come from much deeper sources. An elderly person can hear a problem for the first time and immediately understand not just the superficial situation, but the spiritual and energetic dynamics that are creating that circumstance. This third sign also manifests through a growing need to transmit knowledge. The elderly soul feels urgency to teach, to share, to record the knowledge it has accumulated. It's not ego or need for attention. It's a genuine spiritual calling to serve as a bridge between what was learned in the past and what needs to be known in the future. When you recognize this sign in an elderly person, know that you're before a living library, a treasure of wisdom that cannot be found in books or universities. The fourth sign that Helena Blavatsky identified is perhaps the most extraordinary. The elderly soul develops a direct and constant connection with spiritual dimensions, transforming into a living bridge between the physical world and the higher planes of existence. This connection isn't occasional or fortuitous, it's a permanent state of expanded consciousness. Have you ever noticed how many elderly people seem to always be in silent conversation with invisible presences? They move their lips subtly, smile at emptiness, wave at the air. Society frequently interprets this as mental confusion, but Helena Blavatsky revealed the truth. These souls are in constant communication with spiritual guides, family members who have already departed, and even with higher aspects of their own consciousness. This connection manifests in profoundly touching ways. An elderly woman who lost her husband decades ago suddenly begins receiving guidance from him in moments of difficulty. These aren't hallucinations or wishful thinking. They're real, precise communications that bring specific and useful information for concrete life situations. Helena Blavatsky taught that this happens because the elderly soul naturally tunes its vibrational frequency to more subtle dimensions of reality. The dense physical body can no longer mask spiritual perceptions, and consciousness becomes porous to benevolent influences from the higher planes. Many elderly people report experiences of spontaneous astral travel during sleep or meditation states. They visit distant places, meet people they haven't seen in years, receive teachings in spiritual temples that exist only in non-physical planes. Upon awakening, they bring back information and sensations that prove these weren't just common dream experiences. The capacity for spiritual healing also emerges naturally. Without any formal training, many elderly people discover that their hands carry a special energy. Grandchildren calm down when touched by them, plants flourish under their care, environments harmonize with their presence. It's the mature soul naturally channeling divine energies. This fourth sign also manifests through a sharp perception about the spiritual timing of events. The elderly soul knows when someone close is about to go through an important transformation, when a family situation is coming to an end, when new energies are approaching. It becomes a sensitive antenna to the subtle movements of destiny. Prayer and meditation assume a completely different quality. They're no longer formal religious practices, but natural states of communion with the divine. Many elderly people report that they simply talk with God or with the universe, as if they were speaking with an intimate and dear friend. Helena Blavatsky observed that in this phase, the soul also develops a natural capacity for blessing. Words from elderly people carry a special power. When they bless, thank, or express love, these energies manifest in concrete ways in the physical reality of the people who receive these blessings. The perception about death also transforms completely. The elderly soul loses fear of transition because it's already partially living in the spiritual planes. Death becomes just a natural step, a change of state, not a frightening end. If you want to deepen your understanding of these spiritual mysteries, leave your like on this content and share it with someone you know needs to discover these truths about the eternal nature of the soul. But prepare yourself for the fifth sign, which will reveal how elderly souls become natural healers of the emotional and spiritual wounds of the entire family. The fifth sign, identified by Helena Blavatsky, is the transformation of the elderly soul into a natural healer of emotional and spiritual wounds throughout the family lineage. It's as if decades of experience and suffering had distilled in its consciousness a specific type of spiritual medicine that can heal traumas that traverse generations. Have you ever noticed how the presence of a wise elderly person can calm family conflicts that seemed unsolvable? It's not just due to the authority of age or social respect. It's because the mature soul has developed a natural capacity to see beyond the personalities in conflict and identify the deep wounds that are causing the disagreement. This healing happens in surprisingly subtle ways. A grandmother tells an apparently casual story about her own youth, and in that narrative are hidden the keys to resolve a problem her granddaughter is facing decades later. A grandfather makes a simple comment during a family lunch, and his words carry exactly the guidance his adult son needed to hear to make an important decision. Helena Blavatsky observed that the elderly soul develops a sharp perception about family patterns that repeat through generations. It can identify where the energetic knots that need to be untied are, what the limiting beliefs being unconsciously transmitted are, where the ancestral wounds that still bleed through the descendants are. This process of family healing happens mainly through forgiveness. The elderly soul reaches such a deep state of understanding about human nature that it naturally develops an infinite capacity to forgive. And when it forgives, genuinely from the depths of the soul, that forgiveness radiates through the entire family lineage, healing resentments that had existed for decades. Many elderly people in this phase feel an irresistible impulse to make peace with people they've been in conflict with. They seek out distant family members, apologize for old hurts, express love that was kept for too long. This isn't just a personal movement. It's the soul fulfilling its function of healing the entire genealogical tree. The capacity for listening also transforms completely. When an elderly person in this phase hears someone relating their problems, they don't just listen to the words. They perceive the energies behind the words, identify unexpressed spiritual needs, understand deep fears that not even the person speaking recognizes consciously. Helena Blavatsky taught that this happens because the mature soul develops what she called panoramic vision of life. It can see how apparently negative events are part of a larger process of growth, how apparent sufferings are actually opportunities for spiritual evolution. This healing perspective manifests through infinite patience with human failings. The elderly soul no longer gets irritated with the mistakes of the younger ones because it understands that these mistakes are necessary for learning. It offers guidance when requested, but never forces its wisdom on others. The very presence becomes healing. Grandchildren who visit grandparents in this phase frequently report that they feel inexplicably better after these encounters. Not necessarily because they talked about their problems, but because the balanced and loving energy of the mature soul has a harmonizing effect on anyone who enters its energetic field. This fifth sign also manifests through the ability to identify and nurture the unique talents of each family member. The elderly soul sees potentials that not even the person themselves recognizes, and through subtle and constant encouragement, it helps these talents flourish. When you recognize this sign, know that you're before a soul that has become an instrument of divine healing, capable of transforming ancestral wounds into family wisdom. The sixth sign that Helena Blavatsky identified is extraordinary. The elderly soul develops a natural perception about the individual destinies of the people around them. It's not divination or superstition, it's a profound understanding of the spiritual patterns that govern each individual existence. Have you ever had the experience of an elderly person looking at you with that penetrating gaze and saying something about your future that later proved surprisingly accurate? This happens because the mature soul has developed the ability to read people's spiritual blueprints, the basic plans that each soul brought for this incarnation. This perception manifests in touching and practical ways. A grandmother observes her grandson playing and simply knows what his vocation will be in adult life. It's not based only on obvious talents, it's a direct perception of the spiritual mission that soul came to fulfill. A grandfather talks with his teenage granddaughter and immediately understands what the specific challenges are that she'll need to overcome to reach her personal fulfillment. Helena Blavatsky explained that this happens because the elderly soul has already traveled so much of its own spiritual journey that it has developed a map vision of how lives unfold. It recognizes patterns, identifies synchronicities, perceives the currents of destiny that are moving each person toward their greater purpose. This capacity isn't limited only to close family members. Many elderly people report experiences of meeting strangers and immediately knowing something important about them. An elderly person can talk with someone for the first time and instantly perceive if that person is going through an important transition phase, if they're about to make a crucial decision, or if they need some specific type of guidance. The most fascinating thing is that this perception frequently comes accompanied by a natural impulse to guide or warn. The elderly soul may feel an inexplicable urgency to give specific advice to someone, or to share an experience that seems random, but later proves exactly relevant to what that person was facing. Helena Blavatsky observed that many elderly people in this phase begin to have dreams about people they know, where they see future events related to those people. These aren't common dreams, they're destiny visions that show future possibilities based on the current choices these people are making. Intuition about relationships also becomes extraordinarily sharp. An elderly soul can meet a couple for the first time and immediately perceive if that union has potential to last, what the specific challenges they'll face are, and what type of growth that relationship will bring to both people. This sixth sign also manifests through a natural capacity for matching, connecting people who need to meet each other. Many elderly people feel inexplicable impulses to introduce specific people to one another, and frequently, these connections result in relationships, partnerships, or friendships that transform everyone's lives involved. Perception about timing also becomes extraordinary. The elderly soul knows when it's the right time for someone to make an important change, when a person is ready to receive specific information, when someone needs support before that someone even recognizes their own need. Helena Blavatsky taught that this capacity arises because the mature soul learned to read between the lines of human existence. It perceives subtle energies, karmic patterns, synchronicities that are always present but that most people cannot detect. When you encounter an elderly person who demonstrates this sixth sign, know that you're before a natural oracle, someone who can offer precious insights about your own spiritual journey. But the seventh sign will reveal something even deeper: how these souls become natural bridges between the world of the living and the world of those who have already departed. The seventh sign identified by Helena Blavatsky is perhaps the most touching. The elderly soul transforms into a natural bridge between the world of the living and the world of those who have already departed. It develops a unique capacity to maintain active connections with those who have already made the transition, serving as a channel of communication and comfort for the entire family. You've certainly witnessed an elderly person talking to the portrait of someone who has already died, or making references to advice they received from deceased relatives. Modern society frequently pathologizes these experiences, but Helena Blavatsky revealed that this represents one of the most sacred aspects of spiritual aging. The mature soul naturally develops access to the planes where those who have already completed their earthly journey reside. This communication isn't fanciful or imaginary. Many elderly people receive specific and practical information through these connections. Guidance about family matters, alerts about situations that require attention, messages of love and comfort that need to be transmitted to other family members. The elderly soul literally becomes a spiritual telephone through which those who departed can continue participating in family life. Helena Blavatsky observed that this happens because the mature soul naturally tunes its vibration to the frequencies of the spiritual planes. The veil between worlds becomes more transparent for it, allowing communication that flows in both directions. It not only receives messages from those who departed, but can also transmit feelings and information from the living to those who are already on the other side. This bridge function manifests in profoundly comforting ways for the entire family. A grandmother can suddenly transmit a specific message from the grandfather who already died to a grandson who was going through difficulties. The message carries details so precise and personal that there's no doubt about its authenticity. Only the deceased grandfather could know those specific pieces of information. Many elderly people in this phase also begin to prepare the family for future departures. They transmit messages from other family members who have already departed, alerting about who is preparing to make the next transition, offering anticipated comfort and wisdom about how to deal with these inevitable changes. The capacity to see and interact with spiritual presences also intensifies. The elderly person can point to an empty chair and talk with someone only they can see, but whom the entire family recognizes from the descriptions and characteristics mentioned. It's as if the room were always full of loving visitors that only the mature soul can perceive. Helena Blavatsky taught that this bridge function isn't just a privilege, but also a responsibility. The elderly soul becomes a guardian of the family's spiritual legacies, keeping important memories alive, transmitting values that cannot be lost, preserving connections that transcend physical death. This seventh sign also manifests through a deep peace regarding their own mortality. The elderly soul loses fear of death because it's already in constant communication with those who made this transition. It knows through direct experience that consciousness continues, that love remains, that the spiritual family never truly separates. The consoling presence that these souls emanate is extraordinary. Grieving people frequently report that they feel inexplicably consoled after spending time with an elderly person who demonstrates this seventh sign. It's as if the intimate certainty of this soul about the continuity of life after death were energetically transmitted to whoever is suffering a loss. If you recognize this sign in some elderly person close to you, honor this special capacity. Ask them to share the messages they receive. Let them tell about the visits they have. Listen with respect when they transmit guidance from those who have already departed. The eighth sign that Helena Blavatsky identified is truly extraordinary. The elderly soul develops a natural perception about the great cosmic cycles that govern humanity's evolution. It begins to understand intuitively how apparently isolated events are part of much larger movements in the collective consciousness of our species. Have you ever heard an elderly person make surprisingly precise comments about humanity's future? These aren't predictions based on rational analyses or media information. They're direct perceptions about the evolutionary currents that are moving our civilization toward profound transformations. The mature soul develops a kind of historical vision that goes far beyond personal experience. This perception manifests through an instinctive understanding about the timing of great collective events. Many elderly people, without any formal study of history or sociology, can identify when humanity is approaching important turning points, moments when old structures need to collapse so that new forms of social organization can emerge. Helena Blavatsky taught that this happens because the elderly soul has already lived so long that it begins to perceive the patterns that repeat through decades and centuries. It sees how entire generations go through similar cycles of growth, crisis, transformation, and renewal. This panoramic perspective allows it to identify where we currently are in these great evolutionary cycles. The soul in this phase also develops a special sensitivity to planetary energetic changes. Many elderly people report that they can feel when great events are approaching, not specific events, but waves of transformation that will affect millions of people. It's as if they were sensitive antennas to changes in the morphogenetic fields of human consciousness. This cosmic perception frequently comes accompanied by a profound understanding about the evolutionary purpose of collective challenges. The elderly soul doesn't see wars, economic crises, or pandemics just as tragedies. It perceives how these events catalyze necessary changes in human consciousness, forcing our species to evolve in directions we wouldn't choose voluntarily. Helena Blavatsky observed that many elderly people in this phase begin to have visions about the future of Earth and humanity. These aren't apocalyptic or utopian fantasies, but realistic perceptions about the transformations our species will need to traverse to reach higher stages of spiritual and social development. Understanding about technology also assumes a prophetic quality. Many elderly people, even without technical knowledge, can intuitively perceive how new technologies will affect human consciousness in the long term. They sense when a specific innovation will be beneficial for our evolution and when it will represent a dangerous deviation from our natural spiritual path. This eighth sign also manifests through a cosmic patience with the pace of social changes. The elderly soul doesn't get frustrated with the slowness of transformations because it understands that genuine changes in collective consciousness require generations to consolidate. It sees beyond superficial turbulences and perceives the deep currents that are leading humanity toward greater wisdom and compassion. Perception about the role of different generations also becomes crystalline. The mature soul understands that each generation has a specific function in humanity's great evolutionary project. It doesn't judge the young for their rebelliousness, nor criticize adults for their rigidity. It sees how each phase of life contributes to the general momentum of our species' growth. Helena Blavatsky taught that this eighth sign represents the soul reaching a truly universal perspective. It's no longer limited by personal or even family vision. It can see from the point of view of consciousness evolution itself. When you recognize this sign in an elderly person, know that you're before a soul that has become a cosmic observer, capable of offering insights about humanity's greater destiny. But prepare yourself for the ninth sign, which will reveal how these souls develop a healing capacity that goes far beyond the personal and extends to healing collective wounds of our species. The ninth sign that Helena Blavatsky identified represents the apex of spiritual evolution during aging. The elderly soul transforms into a pure channel of light and healing, capable of radiating transformation energies that affect not only individuals but entire communities. This is the culmination of all previous signs, the moment when the soul reaches its highest expression while still inhabiting a physical body. You've certainly felt the special presence of an elderly person who seemed to emanate a different energy, a deep peace, a luminous wisdom, an unconditional love that touched all people around them. These are the bearers of the ninth sign, souls that have become living beacons of divine consciousness in our world. This transformation doesn't happen by chance. It's the natural result of decades of experience, transcended suffering, accumulated wisdom, and deepened spiritual connection. The elderly soul that reaches this stage has literally become an instrument through which superior forces can operate on the physical plane. Helena Blavatsky observed that these souls develop an extraordinary capacity for healing through simple presence. They don't need to touch, speak, or do anything specific. Their balanced and purified energy automatically harmonizes any environment they find themselves in. Conflicts calm down, tensions dissolve, people in suffering find inexplicable comfort. The radiation of unconditional love becomes constant. These souls have completely lost the capacity to judge or condemn. They see through appearances and perceive only the divine light that dwells in each human being, regardless of the mistakes, limitations, or negative choices these people may have made. This love isn't sentimental or emotional. It's a cosmic force that operates through the mature soul. It's the same love that moves the planets, that makes flowers bloom, that keeps the universe in harmony. And when this love flows through a human being, it has the power to transform everything around it. Wisdom also reaches a transcendent level. The elderly soul in this phase doesn't just know the answers to life's complex questions, it has become a living answer. Its very existence demonstrates spiritual truths that cannot be taught through words, but only through the example of a life completely aligned with divine principles. Helena Blavatsky taught that these souls also develop a special function as light anchors for all humanity. In moments of collective crisis, social chaos, or spiritual confusion, they serve as stable points of spiritual reference, keeping alive the highest frequencies of consciousness even when the world around seems to be in collapse. The 10th and final sign represents the final preparation for the Great Transition. The elderly soul that has reached all previous stages naturally develops complete serenity regarding physical death. It knows through direct experience that consciousness is indestructible, that love is eternal, that nothing truly important is ever lost. This final preparation isn't marked by fear or sadness, but by joyful expectation. It's as if the soul knew it was about to return home after a long journey of learning. It says goodbye with gratitude, leaves blessings for all it touched, and departs with the certainty that it fulfilled its mission on earth. When you recognize these signs in your own life, or in the lives of the elderly around you, know that you're witnessing one of the most sacred mysteries of human existence. Each soul that ages carries within itself the potential for this extraordinary transformation. If these revelations have touched your heart, share this wisdom with other people who need to understand the true nature of spiritual aging. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, comment your reflection on these sacred signs. And always remember, aging is not an end, it's an initiation. Your soul is just beginning its most glorious journey.